All right, so I'm starting up. This is Infosec Decoded number 9, DoSable regular expressions. And we're starting with Elizabeth, Microsoft. Oh, and the Microsoft Exchange stuff, okay?
Yes, Exchange is getting hammered right now, so apply your patches if you haven't already. You're gonna want to do that. I believe we talked a little bit about this on Monday, but it's escalated, and there are a lot more threat actors who have gotten involved right now, and those systems are just getting hammered left and right. So
I remember that the hacking research community was sort of up in arms because somebody published a proof of concept on GitHub, and Microsoft just yanked it down because they own GitHub. Which doesn't seem that unreasonable. I mean, and but yeah, I mean, the point is, if you're using Exchange, knock it off. Get Office 365. What the hell is wrong with you anyway?
A lot of companies are using it, and I don't. A lot of organizations are using it still, and it's one of those legacy systems that it blows my mind as well. I had forgotten that was even an option, because we most of the world's been on 365 for so long. So
we quit teaching Exchange several years ago, saying, well, nobody cares about Exchange anymore.
And if it's to that point in college education, that jumped the shark many years before that even.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So of course, if you are using Exchange, then you clearly need to update it. And apparently a ton of people aren't. So I guess a lot of companies are going to get owned.
So are getting owned right now.
Yeah. So Irvin says that has this story: T-Mobile is stealing our data.
T-Mobile updated their privacy policy.
Oh, okay.
That's set to automatically enroll their customers into ad targeting programs that'll see their data shared with advertisers starting next month.
I thought they'd all been doing that all along.
Apparently they're updating their privacy to say we are doing it. So maybe they have been doing it all along, but now they're kind of giving it's in policy now. And this also works for Sprint folks. So if you're a T-Mobile or a Sprint person, there is a way to get out of it before it takes effect.
Well, why do we care about ad targeting? What harm does it do us?
Other than tracking us and what we're doing, where we're going?
Yeah. Why does that matter anyway?
Because we don't want people to be, or we don't want systems to be building profiles off of us.
I guess.
I mean, why not? I mean, can't we? I like getting targeted ads as opposed to ads that are like, hey, buy, milkshakes, at Dairy Queen. Like, I don't go to Dairy Queen. Why am I getting ads like this? I want ads that I might actually buy something for.
I know.
We come back to not knowing who's buying that data again, because it's not like they're vetting the people that purchase it, and it could just be anyone. It could be like a stalker X that started a shell corp that's buying your data. I mean,
well, yeah, there's that. I mean, I think it's my position of privilege. I mean, nobody I posted something yesterday and it had my address on it, and I said, well, who cares? My address is pretty easy to find, and nobody's going to come do anything to me. So, but I know there are people who are actually being hunted by evil forces, and then they would care about this stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're a T-Mobile or a Sprint customer want to get out of it, there is, in that article, there's a link to follow.
I guess what we need is some kind of regulation around this stuff.
Yeah.
So it doesn't just keep growing. And then the one which I thought was great and named the episode after, DoSable regular expressions. This is awesome.
Yes, this is really awesome. So it's possible to create regular expressions that do real things in applications, like get rid of white spaces, and give it strings so that the regular expression will kind of go forward and back, trying to figure out if this is a correct string or not, and go forward and back and forward and back. And the processor will do this for hundreds of years, running at 100% capacity. And you can completely, DOS a program or something on the web that checks things like, whether or not the user inputted something correctly, or like a correct email, or more commonly something like the user agent often gets regexed, regular expression, and you can use that to essentially DOS the entire server. And it's so cool. And they released it, or I shouldn't say they, the security group run by Ben Collar, I suppose. Ben Collar wrote the article, or DoSable, I guess is the full group. They released a tool to look for these really bad regular expressions called reg exploit. And you can go through your program, check all the regular expressions, and see if any of them are vulnerable to being denial of service.
And he scanned like open source projects, and he found one that has a regular expression that he said could take a week to run.
Yep.
I remember they've said this about rules, snort rules. They say if you're not careful, you can write a snort rule that will totally bog down your server.
Mm-hmm. Same thing. Yeah, it's exactly the same thing with regular expressions. I mean, and this just goes into it used to be sanity checking, like loops that are in some way user controlled. Just have a timeout.
I didn't realize that a regular expression might do loop after loop processing. I thought it was all one pass.
Nope, especially if you have like multiple characters. The article recommends using stripping characters, using things like sed, substitute,
right?
To get rid of stuff. And I do the same thing. I mean, just in general, regular expressions beyond the very simple stuff can just be mind-boggling, yes. Right? Yeah. And so I try to make them as simple as possible. And I guess the old expression, keep it simple, applies to regular expressions as well. If you can do it using a substitution program that just does one pass every time, do that instead of a regular expression.
Yeah. Regular expressions are always too bloody complicated. I only know a few simple ones, and then I just Google for them. Yeah. All right.
This is a cool story, though. I really like this story.
Oh, yeah. All right. And Alan's got the Capitol attack. Oh, yeah. I've noticed people, like, they never even found who set those pipe bombs. The FBI just seems to be asleep at the switch here.
It's the strangest thing. We're only 2 months out from the closest America's ever come to a coup. And it seems like America has already collectively forgotten about the whole incident and written it off as this one-off aberration.
Which it totally is not. I mean, Trump is making it very clear he intends to do it again. And a whole bunch of other Republicans plan on doing it again.
So it would seem. And so this ProPublica article asks the question of, poses 6 questions that have not been answered in over 15 hours of congressional hearings.
Yeah.
What has happened? And it seems that the answers are not very forthcoming. Some of the highlights include exactly what happened in the response to January 6th versus earlier responses to Black Lives Matter protests, and why there was such a difference in those responses.
Well, I think we all know why there was a difference. Well, they haven't had to say it out loud.
Yes. And of course, there's always the subtext that will never be publicly acknowledged. But at least what the talking points of the apologists and the decision makers that day are interesting. The head of the Army, Ryan McCarthy, apparently during the January 6th events was at times not available. And also at other times seemed to actively obstruct any requests for assistance from the National Guard. In particular, the head of the National Guard was not able to do even basic redeployment of Guard members from one traffic intersection to another traffic intersection just for traffic control without the explicit approval of head of the Army, McCarthy. So And in addition to that, National Guard members were not issued just standard items like body armor in advance of the January 6th events, which they always had been in the past. And so the head of the National Guard was saying that this was unprecedented in his career, that he'd never seen, that he'd never encountered such restrictions and micromanaging, shall we say,
Yeah.
from head of the army.
Which
Anyway,
it does seem to very strongly suggest that there were traitors on the inside
yes,
working with the attackers, which is entirely logical.
right. And it should be pointed out that James McCarthy was a Trump appointee.
Yeah.
So,
It also makes me wonder how much of that is due to optics, because they didn't want, they didn't want to have all these National Guard members in riot gear like they were for all of the other marches this summer.
well, that's a good point. Apparently, there was concern that sending troops to the Capitol would inflame, quote, inflame tensions.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, I mean, but also I think realistically, I think surveys show that like 80% of all Republicans believe the big lie that Trump really won and they were justified in what they were doing. And I would see no reason why top government officials should be exempted from that. A bunch of them probably really felt like the rioters were correct and should be encouraged.
Yes.
This is the problem with civil war. I mean, we're not all on the same team anymore.
Right.
And I've heard some people say they hope that Merrick Garland, now that he's in, will vigorously investigate this stuff, and maybe everybody was just holding their breath waiting for him.
Well, we can hope. We can
Yeah.
hope. But Congress is probably just as well positioned to get answers, and they haven't so far.
Well, Congress is pretty paralyzed by internal division too. And the other thing I think I've seen is when I've heard analysis of why Biden is not doing anything about Saudi Arabia, for example, they say Biden is ignoring everything except his immediate priorities, like to deal with the virus, and everything else can wait till later, which I think is logical, because if he doesn't have major accomplishments now, he will lose everything in 2022. And so things like foreign policy can wait till later.
Mhm.
And things like dealing with the insurrection can wait till later. I mean, realistically, there probably won't be another insurrection until 2024, when Trump or some Trump surrogate will run, and they will lose, and they will lie about it and attack again. It all seems quite clear. And that's by then we needed to have some kind of defense against it. But as far as I can tell, the only plan to stop it is to end the filibuster so we can push through HR 1 and prevent the Republicans from rigging the election. And then the idea will be just like Trump, that if they lose by a big enough margin, they won't be able to sell the big lie. But that seems like a really weak read to rely upon. I mean, Trump lost pretty big this time, but his supporters totally believe the lie. So I don't know. I think America's in big trouble. It's not over yet. Anyway, the NFTs are coming. And so the first NFT sold for a really large price, $69 million from Beeple. It's just a JPEG. And another guy tried to understand what non-fungible tokens are. They're on the Ethereum blockchain. They're the same thing as CryptoKitties, which I bought some years ago. They are collectibles. They're on the blockchain for no good reason at all. Like everything on the blockchain is for no good reason at all. They're just like if you buy a commemorative coin and you have like a certificate from somebody saying, this is a genuine coin from the 19th century and therefore worth $1 million. Whereas if you make a copy of that coin, it's only worth $10 because this is the original. And the only point of the blockchain is a place to have your certificate to prove that it's the original. So now it's a collectible. So you can have digital originals that can't be copied or duplicated, because even though you could make a duplicate of them, only one is the officially owned one. So it does make as much sense, I think, as collecting anything else like postage stamps or coins or anything. And this guy sold his tweet about his cat for $50 to somebody the same way. Someone can be declared the official owner of this, which means very little, except some people care and they'll pay money for that privilege. But the thing that has begun to happen is a bunch of people are just taking random stuff off the internet who are not the authors of it, putting it on the blockchain, calling it a token and selling it for money. So artists are finding their art sold for money by somebody else. And they're like, hey, what is this crap? And that, I think, is the problem with the blockchain. I mean, the blockchain does not solve the actual problem in authenticity, which is verifying who somebody is. It just solves the unimportant problem of how do you keep the ledger of those records, which is not the weak spot. This is why I made a blockchain voting system years ago, and it works, but it doesn't solve the main problem in voting, which is how do you know who somebody is and that they're not voting twice? Well, the blockchain doesn't solve that problem. The only thing it does solve is keeping the computer record of it, and that's not hard to solve other ways. You can just have an ordinary database. But anyway, these NFTs are going to be the latest thing making a pile of money, and everybody is madder than hell because, of course, it encourages the blockchain, which wastes an incredible amount of energy. And it doesn't even seem to be benefiting artists much if you're just going to let everybody sell them. So I think they're discovering, it's always the same thing. They're discovering that they need like real human government to limit what the blockchain does in order for the finances to work. They would need like an accrediting body to certify that you are actually the author of this artwork or something, which is not a problem you can solve with a computer. So anyway, that's that.
Yeah, I find it funny sometimes when stuff like this comes up, when we're doing things in California like banning internal combustion engines and gas stoves.
And Elon Musk, who is saving the world with his electric cars and then destroying the world with his bitcoins. He hasn't like connected these two things together.
Right.
Well, the Bitcoin is, the whole blockchain is full of so many big lies. And the big one they've been pushing is they're going to have proof of stake replace proof of work. But they've tried it several times and it totally doesn't work. So in principle, Ethereum has promised that they are going to become less energy wasteful, but in practice, there is no way to get there that anybody knows. Bitcoin is not even pretending. Bitcoin relies on maximum waste. Anyway,
Yeah.
Liz has got the 150,000 security cameras.
Yeah, this story was big over the past couple days. So this company that's a startup here in Silicon Valley is that they run like monitored security camera solutions for enterprise customers, and oh, it was bad. They let they let this super admin password out on, let that get leaked, so that then, of course, predictably, there were these camera systems were exposed to whoever wanted to get in there. So it was Cloudflare, it was hospitals, it was Tesla, it was all of these major corporations, and some of them with pretty sensitive footage, like in the hospitals. And it begs the thought that, you know, our desire for security and monitoring is its own its own vulnerability in and of itself, because when we implement these systems, you know, we don't we're opening ourselves up to attack and not always considering what's happening on the other end. You just trust that these companies know their stuff and are doing the right thing when you purchase these products from them, but that is not the case. And it's especially embarrassing when it's something that's super low hanging fruit like that. It's you can barely call this a hack. This was more like OSINT in and of itself, because it's not like they had to do anything except find some irresponsibly handled credentials to access all of these systems.
Yep.
And this isn't an outlier.
No, not at all. That's why our security model depends so much on secrets, and the secrets are shared by so many people that this keeps happening.
Yeah, and I mean, it's crazy. I mean, the schools you know, I think about schools a lot where they are where they're implementing a lot of this stuff in schools now, and they have this company has the software that lets people search for a person who might be on a building or on a campus based on their description or their face. Maybe you can upload a picture of them, and then you can track their movement
Schools
from
have
room to
this?
room or around the campus. Huh?
Schools have this?
Oh yeah,
Facial
yeah.
recognition and like
Yeah,
automated
something.
license plate. Isn't that too expensive for schools to afford?
You would think, but their cameras start at $600 and their licenses start at $200 a year.
And so I guess the idea
Uh,
is if you have some like pedophile wandering around, you can like track him or something.
Well, yeah, there's always an argument for this stuff. Like, okay, you've got an active shooter on campus. You know, how do you figure out where they are and how to stop them and stuff like that. And I feel like there are always solid cases to be made
Mhm.
for why these things should exist. Like one thing that springs to mind for me is what happened a month or so ago here, where the guy was, I believe he was a CCSF student, was delivering DoorDash and had his kids in the back of his van, and somebody stole the van with the kids in the back and they couldn't find it for some time. And it's like, well, we've got all these automated license plate readers, spyware, Caltrans cameras, etc. And you know, we can use those to intrude upon the lives of citizens, but not to find like missing children in the middle of the night, you know. So I sometimes, yes, I think that that these things can be, the case can be made that these systems can be used for good, but the problem is in the implementation and in the execution and
Yeah.
the total lack of oversight.
Yeah, this reminds me of something that my students were surprised. I quoted, I saw it on Twitter. They said, security is a human problem with a minor technical component. The real issue is the human behavior.
Yes, that's an excellent quote.
Yeah. Anyway, and yeah, this data center burned down in Strasbourg.
Yes, data center burned in France. A number of European sites were affected. I like that their message to all their customers was very simply, enable your DR plans.
Yeah.
Um,
Now, of course, supposedly they're supposed to have countermeasures at these data centers, but apparently,
yeah, that's the interesting part. Is a lot of this place burned. So what happened to all those measures, like using gas or using various fire
Yeah, I
suppression?
wondered.
Very
Right,
odd.
like that's what the halon's for.
yeah. And I
You
know
know,
it reminds me of the 5 Nines data center, 365 Main in San Francisco, that went down for like 4 days. And you know, they promised 5 Nines contractually, which means they can only go down for 5 minutes a year. And this was about 10 years ago. And I remember they said everybody was lined up to get in there, and everybody's waiting to get in and see what happened. It was their power failure. And somehow all their backup batteries did not come online because they were all from the same brand and they had a defect. So that when the switch tried to switch to battery backup, it didn't. And it took them like days to resolve it.
Fun.
Well, you know, this is why I liked Cloudflare. When Matthew Prince told me, I go to the data center and I pull out the plug. Let's see if this failover really works. And it does. And I said, you got to do that, you know? You got to test your failover.
Yeah. I
So
already
you could do them a favor by going in there and setting fire to the trash can. Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
They might not say thank you though. Anyway.
Yeah. But at least you know it works.
Yeah.
So let's see what the news comes up with as they investigate why this fire happened and why they weren't able to take it out.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, why didn't they have another center somewhere? Anyway.
Well, you know, there's been speculation that the fire was actually caused because of OVH's attempts to improve their their power backup
Well,
system.
that's usually what happens. It's usually your own staff breaking everything.
Yeah, apparently they had electricians in the building working on that very system earlier
Oh.
that day.
Oh,
And
man.
then, of course, that night, the whole place burns down.
Well, that's very common.
Yeah.
That's what
I
happened
did.
to Amazon about 15 years ago. They were putting in a new load balancing system to prevent servers getting overloaded, and it ran backwards and focused all the load to the system, so they all crashed and they went down for like 4 days.
I did see a good joke about this though. Somebody had posted a picture of the like enormous conflagration and the smoke cloud rising up from the data center with the caption, a rare image of data being transferred between clouds.
Yes, that's
That was
right.
pretty-
Yeah. Yeah. All right. And the Hubble has
Yes.
found an atmosphere.
Well, yes. So let's go back in time.
Yeah.
Billions of years ago, about 4 billion years ago, a planet formed named GJ 1132b. We'll just call it 1132 from going forward. This planet formed, it's known as a sub-Neptunian planet, meaning it had a very thick and lush atmosphere. However, the star it was around was very radioactive, shooting a lot of radiation, and it blew the atmosphere away. And now normally and all that was left of 1132 is just a little rocky core. And so that should have been the end of the story. And normally these planets around highly, radioactive, I don't know, or stars that give off a lot of radiation are very boring because they're just these rocky cores, right? Well, Hubble stumbled upon 1132 and noticed something very strange. This planet that had all its atmosphere stripped away now has a new atmosphere kind of growing around it. And this atmosphere is actually coming from volcanism on the planet. And so what's really cool about this is that astronomers, one, realized that these planets that have been stripped due to the star actually can be really interesting, one. And two, as far as I know, this is really the first time we're doing some exogeological studies. We're looking at volcanism on a planet around another star that's light years away. I mean, that is so cool. Anyway, I just wanted to draw attention to that. And yeah, good work to the Hubble team, ESA and NASA. Good job.
And so they're doing all this. How can they do it so far away? I guess they look at the pattern of the light to detect the gas on the surface because they can't resolve any features or anything, right?
Right, exactly. So yeah, when you're dealing with planets that far away and you're dealing with the atmospheres, obviously you're not going to get a direct picture of anything like that. However, light does pass through the atmosphere and you can get trace signatures of what's in the atmosphere. In this case, they found things like, methane, hydrogen, and a few other atmospheric components that are reminiscent of volcanism.
And how far away is this planet?
That is a good question.
I can't see it here because
yeah.
last I heard, about 10 years ago, they started finding exoplanets, but they couldn't even see them at all. They would just see the star wobble and deduce that there was a planet there. So apparently now they can actually get an image of the planet, or at least some of the light from the planet, and tell it as separate light from the star, which is pretty impressive.
Yes, they can do that. Like I said, you can't image an exoplanet still yet, but you can get data about the exoplanet's atmosphere in the right conditions.
That's very impressive.
Very impressive. And if I can get my find to work, light year around.
But that's why my question is, how far away is it? Because resolving those two would suggest that you somehow made a spatial separation of that tiny distance between the star and the planet at an interstellar distance.
Yeah.
That seems unlikely. It seems more likely that you would just find light at a different wavelength or something. But you're
you're definitely looking for artifacts, not for direct images. Like I said, when you're working on exoplanets, there are a couple of different ways you can do the transit method, which you're just looking for dips in the solar output. And likewise, if you do the transit method, that light is also going through the atmosphere, and you can do stuff like that.
That would seem the most likely. Yeah.
You can also do like the wobble method, to figure out where the exoplanets are. I mean, there's lots of ways to do it, but you just can't do it directly because they're too small and they're right next to very bright objects, which just make them very difficult to image.
Yeah, that's why I'm amazed. They must have an extremely precise measure of the light output so they can detect a tiny alteration in the output as the planet transits or something.
Yeah, it's a good thing that mirror on the Hubble is steady and repaired, because we're getting we got a lot of good data out of Hubble. It's definitely worth the effort that we put into maintaining and fixing it.
Yeah. Now, I've heard a few years ago that if you use adaptive optics, you can get pictures as good as the Hubble from the ground now. Is that true?
I don't know if it's as good. Keep in mind too that the ground, even if you can use adaptive optics, and what adaptive optics does is shoot a laser through the air, and it kind of measures the distortions based on the atmosphere, and then tries to correct that. And that's really good. However, keep in mind that even if you correct those distortions, the atmosphere actually blocks a lot of wavelengths of light.
Yeah.
So there's still a really good reason to put telescopes in space. And I know that the James Webb Space Telescope is going into space specifically because they want to look at atmospheres of exoplanets. So apparently, if you want to do that, space is the place to do that.
Yeah, well, I want to look at atmospheres of exoplanets. I think I want to pick one and like send a probe there to plant life on it. I think that would be awesome.
No, if we're going to go to exoplanets to seek out new life, I mean, we have to be the alien invaders and take control of the planet.
Well, sure, that's what I figure, but I'm pretty sure the only aliens we're going to have to take it from will be blue-green algae.
Well, yeah, but I mean,
But
they'll
first,
be easily conquered, and so that's
what I figure. Yes. So we might as well, like, terraform it and send up some cells and colonize it by planting humans on it. That's my idea.
I think it's a good idea. So that algae who's boss.
I know, that's right. I was talking about this before we started. I mean, since Fermi's paradox convinces me there is nobody out there for us to talk to, that means that all this real estate is just sitting there with nothing happening, and we might as well move in. Anyway, all right. So Alan's got gig workers. Oh boy.
Yes, this is an interesting piece from Ars Technica on what appears to be the relationship between the number of gig workers available to work on platforms such as Uber and Lyft and so forth, versus the stimulus payments, or I should say the COVID relief payments that are being sent out to folks. And it turns out that there is a very clear relationship here. When people were getting those relief checks, they weren't driving on those platforms. It's also become very clear that the way these platforms are being used by a lot of folks is that they've had some kind of catastrophic financial event in their lives, or they've hit a rough patch and they need to generate some income quickly on the side, maybe as a supplement to a full-time job. So they start working on one of these platforms. And so a lot of folks who work on these platforms do so out of great exigent need, economic need. And it's not, in terms of dollar amount, it's not a huge need. It's not in tens of thousands of dollars. It's maybe some hundreds of dollars per month. And so as soon as people got that money, thanks to the COVID relief program, then they didn't need to work on these platforms anymore. Anyway, looking forward, this has huge consequences for the gig economy companies in general. If the minimum wage were raised, for example, or if there was something resembling a universal basic income, then these platforms probably wouldn't have very many drivers anymore. Their entire business model would collapse because they're essentially dependent on folks who are short on money and don't have a lot of other good options available to them, at least in the short term.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, I've always thought that these things are pretty much a fraud. I think most people don't even really make money, especially if you use your own car.
Right. If you factor in the repairs, gas, total ownership cost of those vehicles, you're barely breaking even.
These things remind me of payday loans. They're just a way to exploit the poor and steal the little bit they have.
Right. Yes. Yeah. To me, it's unfathomable that Uber is still a going concern. And they've abandoned the self-driving car technology essentially by spinning it off. So they are wholly dependent on their human workers. If it hadn't been for Proposition 8 passing earlier, I don't know if they'd still be in business, really.
Yeah.
Are they still doing the thing where they get, oh yeah, they are doing it, where they get the drivers locked into leases?
Oh, that, yeah, very exploitive.
Where they, yes. And you know, they've got a lot of rules. You can really easily end up underwater on one of these cars. And people do, because they think, okay, well, I've got an old crappy car, but this might be my only option to make money. And then they decide to get involved with Uber's vehicle solutions program so that they can get a car at probably some kind of exorbitant rate, I would imagine.
Yep. Car leasing is one of the biggest scams out there. Yeah.
And it's one of those good credit, bad credit, no credit at all, which is code for bend over.
Yeah.
Consumer.
Yeah. And I've got a thread here from Pwn All the Things about Big 5 devices, and Big 5 IP devices have a bug that I think remote code execution bug. But the interesting thing is, it turns out they have not even turned on any of the basic mitigations. They don't have stack cookies or address space layout randomization or any of that stuff. Remind me of a Raspberry Pi version 3 that also has none of that stuff. And that's his point, is that their internal processes are apparently terrible. These trusted devices that people use as load balancers and such are running really, really bad software. And so it's not so much this one thing to get patched, but they really ought to be concerned with their whole security process, which is, you know, another example of what we've been saying. A lot of people are just doing deplorable things. And this is why I sort of like compliance frameworks. I mean, there ought to be like a compliance standard that says you're doing like the top 10 best practices, and you ought to have to meet that before people will buy your stuff. Anyway, then Liz has got, the GitHub with the exchange.
Yeah, I should have put this all together as one story, because we talked about it earlier. But it is a story in and of itself, in that Microsoft removed proof of concept exploit code for the exploit that's attacking, that people are using to attack the exchange servers that we talked about in our first story. And it's really got the security community sort of up in arms. I'm not super surprised about this. It kind of makes sense that they would do that. I also think it's kind of crappy that they would do that, but it makes sense. I mean, it's just poor optics on their part when they're not really doing this with other exploit code, just one that attacks one of their weakly secured products. So
yeah, I know Richard Betlick, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, he blocked me on Twitter a couple of weeks ago. He blocked pretty much everybody raging about this. He's, I think, the main important security figure saying nobody should publish proof of concept code. You're irresponsible. You're just ruining the world. Why don't you people get rid of your Metasploit and everything? You're just destroying the world. And anybody that said anything, he blocked them all one day. It seemed like he blocked half of Infosec Twitter in one day. And because he feels very strongly, basically the old Microsoft model, that you hackers should just shut up and everything will be fine. Which I think is not the, yeah.
Agreeing to disagree isn't one of our tribe's strengths, I feel.
What's that?
I said agreeing to disagree is not one of our tribe's strengths.
No, absolutely not. Anyway, that's the whole full disclosure debate that's been raging for 20 years, and without any resolution, really. But I say, you know, I think I like the Google model, where you give everybody like 30 or 90 days and then you dump it. That seems to give some degree of what they call responsible disclosure without paralyzing everybody.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. To be fair, this was responsibly. I believe this was responsibly disclosed, and people were given an opportunity to patch. But you know.
Well, it's not like they're suing him. And, if you're going to dump a Microsoft exploit, you probably don't want to dump it on a Microsoft property. That does seem like
It
you're
does,
asking
and
for it.
It's like, geez, at least put it on Bitbucket or something. Like,
And the research team didn't seem too offended. He said, well, they took it down, and I guess I'm not too surprised they took it down.
right.
Anyway, so Irvin's got this Windows update that's crashing Windows.
Yet again, another Windows update is causing blue screen of deaths.
But only when you print. I was glad to see that because I gave up printing like 10 years ago, so it's not going to bother me.
Yes, yeah, printing to Kyocera Universal Print. Yeah, Kyocera's. So fun.
Only if you're printing to this particular brand of printer. Well, that might not even be Microsoft's problem. That might just be a problem with that print driver.
Yeah, but it seems that it was Microsoft's update that caused that to happen.
Oh, yeah. And besides, Microsoft now certifies all print drivers.
Yeah, and Kyocera's I've seen in a lot of offices. They're usually those nice big printers that can do stuff quickly. So this is definitely going to be a problem for people.
I remember about 10 years ago when I think McAfee pushed out a virus update that killed Windows machines.
Yes, I remember that.
And one of my students was like a data center worker, and he said, yeah, I had to carry this CD from machine to machine for all 1,500 machines to boot from the CD because you couldn't fix it any other way.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess but since it only happens when you print, then I guess you could reboot the machine and not print and roll back the update or something.
Yeah, something like that.
So you could probably write a script to at least fix this, or just tell people not to print for a while.
Yeah, true.
Yep.
Yeah, I updated Windows recently too. And what Windows did during the update is create a new partition on my hard drive, which if you ever do a boot, know that is basically death to the secondary, Linux operating system. And I don't know why Microsoft is doing this. Why are you repartitioning my hard drive for me during an update? This is, I thought we were past this, Microsoft. Stop breaking my dual booting Linux machine.
That is really harsh. I mean, why are they doing that? I know Windows since Vista has expected like a 100 megabyte partition to boot from. Did you actually somehow have Windows on a machine that didn't already have that?
No, I had the 100 megabyte partition. And actually when I looked at my partitions, there are now 7 on my hard drive.
Oh, now there was a time years ago when it would make a new partition just to download the OS and then boot from that, mounting it as like a drive. That might be what it did.
That might be what it did. I mean, the partition's still there. I mean, it's just sitting there. I haven't even looked. It just added a partition, which then, of course, Grub said, what is this?
Yeah, yeah, that's really harsh.
Yeah, Microsoft cut that out. That's not okay.
This is why I quit dual booting Windows and Linux like 10 years ago, because they would keep killing each other and irritating me.
Well, I mean, Linux never kills Windows, but Windows, for whatever reason, Microsoft has decided, like I said, to add new partitions during the update.
Well, that has always been the position of Microsoft. They are the only operating system in the world, and everybody else should just die.
I mean, I thought we were past that, but okay, I guess not.
Yeah. All right. And I'm losing my mind. That was this. NFTs are even worse. This is you, right, Kaitlyn?
That is me. And we already talked about this earlier in the podcast. NFTs are terrible, horrible. And so this article put out by Mashable, it basically goes over the same thing you said earlier, Sam, that these NFTs, non-fungible tokens, are were designed to help creators, quote unquote. But of course, what they're doing is facilitating art theft instead. And they're using up a ton of CO2. They're not really adding anything to the market that was already there.
Yeah.
And of course, it also brings up a lot of new problems because you can actually add those NFTs to not just things like other people's artworks or your own artwork, ideally, but, people are adding, putting out or creating NFTs for other people's contents, which is bad enough. But what about NFTs to things like leaked nudes? I mean, that can be really harmful.
How is that any different than just, I know if you have like an unauthorized picture and you make it an NFT, how is that any different than just publishing it anyway?
I mean, with revenge porn, I think, you can essentially own it forever, in the blockchain. I mean, that's.
Well, I think that's the point. There's no way to take anything off the blockchain.
Yeah.
So once you put something on the blockchain, it's there forever.
Mm-hmm.
And like so many things on the internet, they didn't think this through. The
Right.
ability to erase data is like an essential feature.
It is. And when you're dealing with sensitive data,
Yeah.
like I said, with like revenge porn and stuff, I mean,
Yeah.
no, there's a lot of problems with this. NFTs, yeah, that needs to go as soon as
But it does
possible.
seem like these other problems are really nothing new. It's nothing more than art forgery or intellectual property theft, where you take somebody else's stuff and then pretend it's yours and sell it. It really is not even related to NFTs or the blockchain. It's been an ancient problem.
Well, I mean, that's the same thing with blockchain too, is that blockchain was originally designed with the idea that we're going to, or at least cryptocurrency was designed with this idea that we're going to liberate money and it's going to be great. But of course, what's it used for? It's used for illegal laundering. It's used for illegal, purchases. And the same thing is happening with NFTs, is that the creators or the people that are advocating it are saying, oh, it'll be great for art creators and people can now sell their artwork online and you can have proof of that. But of course, what's it really being used for? Illegal things.
I still remain a huge skeptic about all these blockchain things. As far as I can tell, the only point of a blockchain is to dazzle people with technical complexity so they feel insecure, and now you can pick their pocket. It doesn't actually accomplish anything. It just makes you look smart, to throw on these technical terms, so people feel embarrassed.
Well, at least in this case, the article makes the comparison of NFTs being sort of like pissing on a hydrant, right? Like you're not really adding anything to the world. You're just saying, oh, this is mine. And in a world where we're becoming increasingly post-scarcity, creating artificial scarcity through NFTs seems like a step backwards.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's no different than, say, Second Life, where you could own land. If someone made $1 million by selling real estate in Second Life, it's just digital property.
It is. And, NFTs may, under different circumstances, just like the blockchain, could have, a place. But as it's currently set up, where you're just kind of NFTing everything,
I've been teaching blockchain for years, and the enthusiasts all say it's going to make these great new things possible. It's going to bank the unbanked and make banks better and everything. And none of that ever happens. It's a solution in search of a problem. There is no actual application except money laundering, as far as I can tell.
Right. And I agree. It's the same thing with NFT, is that it's a solution looking for a problem.
Yeah.
It is a solution, and there will be good. I think that you could apply it to something in a way that would enhance the experience. Digital goods in video games, like Second Life having an NFT system where you can show that, where they have proof and they know that you are the creator in Second Life, and you can apply it to the account and, and then you can trade it. I mean, that would work. But the problem is when you tie it to Ethereum and anyone can make it, and, people are just using it for illegal things and just copyrighting other people's tweets and content. No, I mean, it's just not, no.
But I mean, we already have digital property in World of Warcraft and Second Life, and you don't need the blockchain. You have a main database that records the fact that you now have a magic sword or something, and that solves the problem without creating tons of CO2.
And that's true too. Yeah, that's the other big thing, of course, is that the amount of pollution that these things put out. Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, NFTs are putting out a lot of pollution, and basically that's what you're paying for. You're paying for pollution that represents an item. Yeah. And it's like, we need less pollution. Come on, people.
And also with a centralized database, you could take something down if it turns out to be problematic, like the revenge porn. It just makes, and ultimately the idea of blockchain was you don't have to ever trust anybody. And that is just not true. The part where you take the real world thing and turn it into a digital thing involves trusting somebody. And that there's no technological solution there.
Right, and that's the difference between fungible versus non-fungible.
Yeah.
That when it's fungible, then I guess you don't really have to trust anyone. But when it's non-fungible, you do have to at least trust the source. There's no way to authenticate that you are the original artist without any sort of centralized, system.
No, I think you have to trust people in the Bitcoin blockchain too, because what you do is you buy them from an exchange, and the exchange is manipulating the price and lying about the volume to trick you into misinvesting. Anytime you deal with any other humans, there's a way they can stab you in the back. And these technological solutions are not preventing that.
That's true.
They're just creating a different complex system for people to exploit. Anyway, so MIPS becomes risk.
Yes, MIPS is essentially dead. MIPS,
Okay, what is MIPS anyway? I never have really had it straight. I only know like x86 machine code and 6502 machine code before that. What was MIPS? It's sort of in between, right?
Well, MIPS stands for microprocessor without interlocked pipeline stages.
All right, what does that mean?
I'm looking that up right now because I always forget.
Because I know you can only learn MIPS assembly language at City College instead of x86, and I really don't know the difference.
Well, MIPS has an interesting history. Back in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, MIPS was considered really up and coming. It is an instruction set architecture. It's a RISC ISA.
Okay.
Instruction set.
So like ARM.
Yes, that's right. But back in the 80s, early 90s, MIPS was it. ARM was, a very distant third place after Intel and MIPS and some other companies too.
Is there anything we use that's running on MIPS anymore?
A bunch of processors use MIPS, especially routers.
Oh.
Yeah. So there are a lot of routers out there that use MIPS chips.
So if I look at Cisco machine code, it's going to be MIPS machine code?
Possibly, yeah. I don't know about what kind of processors Cisco's use. Actually, I think they do their own silicon development in-house. I think they've got their own ASICs.
They probably would, yeah.
But there are a lot of MIPS chips out there. Billions and billions of devices have MIPS processors inside of them. Silicon Graphics was running off of MIPS CPUs for a few years. In fact, they bought out MIPS Technologies back in the early 90s because it looked like MIPS was going through a rough patch back then, and they wanted to assure that they'd have a supply of their processors in their machines. Anyway, Intel won that war, and RISC was on the outs for many years until ARM made a comeback with mobile devices in the aughts. And ARM has prospered while MIPS has struggled. It's gone through a number of ownership changes, most recently an artificial intelligence startup, and that startup finally failed and took MIPS down with it. They tried to do a few things along the way, like open sourcing MIPS, so it'd be more like RISC-V, but even that didn't work out. And so this company, this artificial intelligence company, has come back from the dead. It's been reformulated, and it's taken on the name of MIPS. However, they are no longer supporting MIPS. So even though they have the name, they're not actually doing anything with the technology anymore. So MIPS is essentially dead. There are some chip manufacturers that will continue to produce MIPS chips, chips with using the MIPS ISA instruction set architecture, but it's very few. And this MIPS company will not be providing any support to them. So it's not going to be acknowledged really by the mainstream tech press, but it is a big deal because there are billions of processors out there that use this instruction set architecture. It isn't a significant one from a historical standpoint. And the greatest irony of all is that this MIPS company is now switching over to RISC-V, which is the newest, latest, and greatest totally open source instruction set architecture that's now being set up as the competitor to ARM. And RISC-V is very interesting. It has a lot of similarities with MIPS, apparently. I don't really know this stuff myself, but it seems like RISC-V has a lot of momentum going behind it because it's not encumbered with all the restrictions and the licensing of ARM. And it's also not susceptible to any kind of trade embargoes, which is a real concern for Chinese silicon manufacturers and designers. So we may be seeing a time where Intel is in third place and it's ARM and RISC-V fighting it out for dominance in the ISA world. We'll see. It's interesting.
But you can't buy anything with RISC-V yet, right?
Oh, no, that's not true. There are plenty of devices out there and chips out there that have RISC-V.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Nothing very high powered yet. As far as I know, there are no laptops or servers running RISC-V. I could be wrong about that. But there are a bunch of small devices, like home hobbyist type devices that now use RISC-V processors. And there are a number of companies trying to develop chips and market chips, more powerful chips, including MIPS. So it's fast developing.
So most of what we use, though, is running on Intel or ARM, right?
Right now, yes, but that's probably going to change.
Okay. I know what I've heard for the last 5 years is Intel is going down and ARM is going to take over.
Yeah. But ARM itself has gone through some changes. It was an independent company, publicly traded. Then it was bought out by SoftBank. Then it got sold off by SoftBank and was bought by NVIDIA. So it's gone through a bunch of ownership changes and the licensing got more complicated along the way. So I think there is some hesitancy about developing on ARM, not to mention the costs associated with that. When you can just use this totally open source ISA, it's kind of like the Linux versus Microsoft Windows. And software has been dominated, in many ways dominated by open source for decades now, but hardware hasn't. But RISC-V provides the avenue for hardware to be more open sourced.
So that means the M1 Mac is having to pay royalties to ARM for using ARMs?
Yes.
Oh, right. That's interesting. Okay.
And that makes sense for a company like Apple because they can afford it, first of all, and they get really good support and ARM is mature.
Mm-hmm.
But in a few more years, it looks like there will be a lot more options available for RISC-V. It'll be a more mature ecosystem at that point. And maybe more companies will be gravitating towards those RISC-V chips. We'll see.
Okay, so we might have new computers based on that, like the Trash 80 or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there actually was a home computer that ran on MIPS that a lot of people had and maybe didn't realize it. And it was called the Nintendo 64.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, that was because they partnered with, as you mentioned, Silicon Graphics.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, that's cool. And I guess I got the last one here, which is just a leak. Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, was accused of letting his donors get the vaccine first. And now the text messages have leaked out showing that he absolutely did that. He told them to take the first doses of vaccine and claim that there was like a lottery, but in fact, take a bunch and give it to the people that gave him campaign contributions as sort of a kickback. So this, I think, is everybody kind of knew this had happened, but now they have the proof. And of course, it's not clear to me that this actually breaks a law or that any of the voters that would vote for him would care, but it does demonstrate how corrupt the process has been, which has been pretty obvious to all of us watching it. But anyway, as far as I can tell, corruption means absolutely nothing in the modern Republican Party. Nobody cares at all. It matters to Democrats, but as far as I can tell, not to Republicans when their leaders are corrupt. But he's totally corrupt, in case anybody cares. Anyway, all right, I guess that's it. We'll be back. What is it? Alrighty, we'll be back on Monday. Farewell, folks.